What is hallucination? Imagine waking up one morning, reaching for your morning coffee, and watching your hand dissolve into butterflies. Imagine hearing your deceased grandmother's voice calling your name from an empty room. A room you know perfectly well is empty because you just walked through it. Now imagine all of this happening and knowing, completely knowing, that none of it is real. Welcome to the strange, unsettling, and occasionally bizarre world of hallucination. Today we're pulling back the curtain on one of the most misunderstood phenomena in human experience. We'll explore what hallucinations actually are, why they happen, what they can tell us about the brain, and maybe, just maybe, why evolution decided to gift us with the ability to see things that aren't there. Let's dive in. Defining the undefinable. Alright, let's start with the basics. A hallucination is technically defined as a perception in the absence of an external stimulus that has the compelling sense of reality. In plain English, you experience something that isn't there, but your brain insists with 100% confidence that it is there. And here's where it gets weird. Hallucinations aren't just visual. They're not just seeing things. They can be auditory, olfactory, gustatory, tactile, even proprioceptive, which is the fun word for feeling like your body is doing something it's not. Let's break that down. Visual hallucinations, seeing people, objects, lights, patterns, or entire scenes that don't exist. Think of the classic seeing things trope, but usually far more complex than a shadow mistaken for a burglar. Auditory hallucinations, hearing voices, music, clicks, knocks, or sounds with no external source. This is what most people associate with schizophrenia in popular media, but we'll get to why that's a problematic association in a bit. Olfactory, smelling things that aren't there. Gustatory, tasting things that aren't there. Tactile, feeling touches, bugs crawling on skin, temperature changes, pressure. And proprioceptive hallucinations, my personal favorite category, where you might feel like you're floating, shrinking, growing, or that your limbs are moving when they're perfectly still. Now here's what makes hallucination absolutely fascinating from a scientific standpoint. They exist on a spectrum. That means almost everyone, yes, you, watching this video, has experienced something that technically qualifies as a hallucination at some point. Ever been half asleep and seen something in your room that wasn't there? Hallucination. Ever been in a noisy environment and heard your name called, only to realize no one said it? That's called an auditory verbal hallucination in the scientific literature, and about 5 to 10% of the general population experiences them regularly. Ever taken medication that made the walls breathe or the ceiling ripple? Hallucination. The line between normal perception and hallucination isn't as clear as you might think. The brain doesn't have a simple on-off switch for reality. Instead, it constructs reality constantly, and sometimes it constructs badly. If you're finding this exploration of the mind as fascinating as I am, you're in the right place. Subscribe to What Is and hit that notification bell, because we're about to go even deeper down the rabbit hole. Now back to the science. Why do hallucinations happen? The neuroscience. Let's talk about the why. The brain is often described as a prediction machine. In fact, one of the leading theories in neuroscience, the predictive processing theory, suggests that the brain doesn't just receive information from the world. It actively generates predictions about what it expects to experience, then compares those predictions against sensory input. When the prediction and the input match, smooth sailing. Reality feels real. When they don't match, that's when things get interesting. Hallucinations in this framework represent a breakdown in that prediction system. The brain generates a vivid prediction, and for some reason, the neural circuitry for reality checking gets bypassed or muted, and boom, you're seeing something that isn't there. Now let's talk about the brain structures most involved. The thalamus acts as the brain's sensory relay station. It routes sensory information to the cortex for processing. When thalamic activity becomes dysregulated, the result can be sensory distortions, or outright hallucinations. The visual cortex, located at the back of the brain, processes what we see. If it activates spontaneously, without input from the eyes, it generates visual experiences out of nothing. This is why Bonnet Syndrome, a condition causing vivid visual hallucinations in otherwise healthy, visually impaired adults, is so important to understand. People with failing vision start seeing elaborate scenes, faces, animals, patterns. Their visual cortex is bored and decides to entertain itself. The temporal lobe, particularly the auditory processing regions, is where auditory hallucinations originate. Studies show that when people hear voices, their brains often show activity in the speech processing areas, as if they're actually hearing speech. The difference is there's no external speaker. And the amygdala and other limbic system structures, they're involved in the emotional content of hallucinations. That terrifying shadow figure isn't just visually present, it feels threatening because emotional brain centers are fully engaged. Here's a thought to lighten the mood. Your brain is literally just a bunch of electrical signals interpreting other electrical signals. And sometimes those signals get their wires crossed. It's like your brain's own game of telephone. And the message at the end is, there's a dinosaur in your kitchen when there's definitely not a dinosaur in your kitchen. Actually, is there? Types of hallucinations. Now that we understand the basics of how hallucinations happen, let's get specific about the different types. This is where it becomes truly mind-blowing. Hypnagogic and hypnopompic hallucinations. These occur at the boundaries of sleep. Falling asleep, hypnagogic, and waking up, hypnopompic. They're incredibly common, happening to about 25% of the population, and they're completely normal. Ever woken up and couldn't move, felt a presence in the room, or saw a figure standing over you? That's a hypnopompic hallucination. They sometimes accompany sleep paralysis, a terrifying but harmless condition where the brain wakes up before the body does. The interesting part? These hallucinations often include multisensory experiences. You might see, hear, and feel touch simultaneously. Your brain is essentially half dreaming while half awake, and it can't quite figure out which mode to be in. Bonnet Syndrome. As I mentioned earlier, this is when visually impaired individuals, often elderly people losing their vision, begin seeing elaborate, vivid hallucinations. The hallucinations are typically complex. Faces, animals, scenes, geometric patterns. Here's the key point. The people experiencing these hallucinations are cognitively intact. They know their vision is impaired. They know the images aren't real, but that doesn't make them any less vivid or any less disturbing. There's something both beautiful and melancholy about Bonnet Syndrome. The brain, deprived of visual input, essentially starts improvising. It's like a radio tuned to a dead frequency. It doesn't go silent, it plays static. And occasionally that static resolves into something that almost looks like a broadcast. Delirium tremens and alcohol withdrawal hallucinations. This is where we get into more dangerous territory. Chronic alcohol users who stop drinking abruptly can experience severe hallucinatory states, often including tactile hallucinations of insects crawling under the skin, known as formication. These hallucinations are physiological, caused by the brain's rebound activation after being suppressed by alcohol for extended periods. They're a medical emergency and a stark reminder that hallucinations aren't just in the mind, in some abstract sense. They're rooted in concrete brain chemistry. Parkinson's disease and Lewy body dementia. Hallucinations, typically visual, are an extremely common feature of these conditions. In Parkinson's, the neurodegenerative processes affect dopaminergic pathways involved in both movement and perception. What's striking is that these hallucinations often appear before other symptoms. An elderly person experiencing vivid visual hallucinations with no other psychiatric symptoms might be in the early stages of Lewy body dementia, something doctors look for precisely because hallucinations can be an early warning sign. Schizophrenia. Now we arrive at the elephant in the room. Auditory hallucinations, particularly hearing voices commenting on one's behavior or engaging in conversation, are a hallmark symptom of schizophrenia. However, and this is crucial, not all hallucinations indicate schizophrenia. As we've covered, millions of people without any psychiatric condition experience hallucinations regularly. The key difference with schizophrenia isn't just having hallucinations, it's the context in which they occur. The delusions, disorganized thinking, functional impairment, and the broader constellation of symptoms. The media portrayal of schizophrenia as the disease where you hear voices is both oversimplified and stigmatizing. It's a bit like saying, "What is limping?" and answering, "It's a symptom of having been shot." Sure, it's technically true, but it misses the vast majority of causes. Hallucinations across history and culture. Human beings have been experiencing hallucinations since we were human beings. And across every culture and every era, we've tried to make sense of them. Ancient times. In ancient Greece, the Temple of Asclepius was a place where people with ailments, including what we might now recognize as psychiatric conditions, would sleep overnight, hoping for a vision or dream from the god of healing. These incubation rituals often produced vivid hallucinations, which were interpreted as divine messages. The oracle at Delphi, a woman who would enter a trance-like state and deliver prophetic utterances, was possibly experiencing some combination of hallucinations, possibly induced by volcanic gases. There are competing theories. Either way, the ancient world didn't distinguish between hallucination and revelation the way we do now. The medieval period. Medieval Europe had a complicated relationship with hallucinations. On one hand, visions of saints and religious figures were seen as holy, evidence of divine connection. On the other hand, visions of demons and evil spirits could be evidence of witchcraft or demonic possession. Joan of Arc's famous voices, she heard saints telling her to lead the French army, are now understood by many historians as likely auditory hallucinations. Whether those hallucinations were real, in some spiritual sense, is beyond the scope of this video. But the historical record makes clear that she experienced them as genuinely external voices. Indigenous and non-Western perspectives. Many indigenous cultures don't draw the same hard line between inner experience and outer reality that Western medicine does. Some cultures have shamanic traditions that actively cultivate altered states, including hallucinations, as spiritual experiences, not symptoms of disease. In some traditions, hearing the voices of ancestors is simply part of a healthy spiritual life. The concept of hallucinations as illness is relatively recent in human history and culturally specific. This isn't to say hallucinations are always harmless or always spiritual. It's to say that how we interpret hallucinations is deeply shaped by our cultural context, which raises uncomfortable questions about how much of our diagnosis is about brain chemistry versus cultural assumptions. The modern era. In the 19th and early 20th centuries, psychiatry began the process of medicalizing hallucinations, classifying them as symptoms to be treated rather than experiences to be understood. This was both a breakthrough, treating mentally ill patients more humanely, and a limitation, reducing complex experiences to diagnostic criteria. Today we stand at an interesting crossroads. Neuroscience can explain how hallucinations happen in unprecedented detail. But the question of meaning, what these experiences mean to the person having them, remains deeply personal and culturally variable. We've covered a lot of ground today, from the neuroscience of perception to the history of how different cultures have interpreted the experience of seeing things that aren't there. But this is just the tip of the iceberg. If you want to keep exploring the fascinating edges of human experience, the questions that make you wonder, the science that blows your mind, the stories that stay with you long after the video ends, you know what to do. Subscribe to What Is and join the community of curious minds. Hit that notification bell so you never miss an episode. And if this video made you think in ways you didn't expect, share it with someone who loves understanding how the world works, including the mysterious workings of their own brain. Now let's bring it home. Living with hallucinations. Let's end on a practical note. If you or someone you know experiences hallucinations, it's important to understand that having hallucinations does not automatically mean something is wrong. As we've discussed, they're common in the general population, especially at sleep transitions, during illness, when fatigued, or in situations of sensory deprivation. However, certain patterns do warrant professional attention. New hallucinations in someone with no history of them, especially if they're vivid, frightening, or accompanied by other changes in thinking or behavior, should be evaluated by a medical professional. Sudden onset can indicate neurological conditions, metabolic disturbances, medication effects, or psychiatric conditions requiring treatment. Hallucinations that significantly impair daily functioning, making it hard to work, maintain relationships, or care for oneself, absolutely warrant assessment. Hallucinations accompanied by delusions, fixed false beliefs, disorganized thinking, or other unusual psychological experiences should be evaluated. The good news? When hallucinations do indicate an underlying condition, they're often treatable. Antipsychotic medications can reduce or eliminate many types of hallucinations. Cognitive behavioral therapy can help people develop strategies for managing persistent auditory hallucinations. Treating underlying conditions, from vision loss to sleep disorders to substance use, can resolve secondary hallucinations. The stigma around hallucinations, often perpetuated by media portrayals of dangerous crazed visionaries, can prevent people from seeking help. But the reality is much more mundane. The brain is a complicated organ, and sometimes it malfunctions in complicated ways. There's no shame in getting evaluated, and there's no benefit in suffering unnecessarily. So there you have it. Hallucination. What happens when the brain's prediction systems misfire? When the line between signal and noise blurs? When the mind creates its own reality? It's been with us throughout history. It's woven into our spiritual traditions, our scientific inquiries, our artistic expressions. It's a window into how the brain constructs the world, and a reminder that reality is, at best, a collaborative effort between the world outside and the machinery inside. Maybe next time you see something that isn't there, a shadow that moves, a face in the window, a voice calling your name, you'll pause for a moment, not in fear necessarily, but in curiosity. What just happened in your brain? And what does it tell you about the nature of perception itself? Thanks for watching What Is. I'll see you in the next one. Don't forget, subscribe, hit that bell, and stay curious.